This Tuesday, December 22nd, is winter solstice, the longest night of the year. On solstice here in the mid-Atlantic, we'll have more than 14 hours of darkness and only 9 hours, 26 minutes of daylight. Although I will confess that I love the long, hot days of summer when we have close to 15 hours of daylight, I am coming to see the long nights of winter as an expanded opportunity to experience the importance of night. Can you remember as a child, John invited us to do some of this earlier, looking up in wonder at the grandeur of the night, of a starry sky, and feeling how small we humans are in the grand scheme of things? Looking into the night sky with the power of modern science, the most current estimates guess that there are between 100 and 200 billion galaxies in the universe, each of which has hundreds of billions of stars. A recent German supercomputer simulation put that number even higher, 500 billion galaxies in the universe. If that were true, and it may well be, there could be a galaxy out there for every star in the Milky Way. A galaxy out there for every star in the Milky Way. The universe is vast, beyond our full comprehension. I grew up in a small town in the Midlands of South Carolina where we could see quite a few stars in the night sky. And when I would go camping in the mountains of North Carolina, I could see many more stars. But my wife and I now live in downtown Frederick, which we love for many, many reasons, but one of the few downsides is that you can't see many stars at night from the streets of downtown Frederick. The world was transformed in the late 19th century with the beginning of commercially viable electric light bulbs and electric utilities. I suspect many of you have seen those NASA photos taken from space of the Earth at night that show where on Earth is brightly lit up by electronics at night. Even more remarkable is comparing those photos over time. If you look at a nighttime satellite photo of North America from the late 1950s, your eye is drawn first to the top right-hand corner, where there is a solid stream of light that runs from the DC area straight up to New York City. There's also a large patch of light in the Midwest, right that centers around Chicago, and there are small swatches of light throughout the South, which become flecks of light as you move west, with the exception of a few major cities like the Bay Area. But east of the Mississippi in the late 1950s, there remained huge dark areas of light. East of the Mississippi, huge dark areas. But by the mid-1970s, the entire eastern half of the United States is almost completely bright at night. The western half at that point remained comparatively dark compared to that photo of 15 years earlier. But the islands of light are growing, even in the west. Fast forward to the end of the 20th century, and the eastern half of the U.S. is even more solidly and brightly lit. In the west, there are quite a few patches of light around big cities, and the islands of light in the west are so increasingly large and so increasingly close together that it's difficult to find any significant area of darkness, even in the vast territory of the western United States. By 2025, a mere decade from now, it is estimated that from space, one will see almost the entire continental United States as one brightly lit place at night, with the exception of a few small pools of darkness in the west. The upshot is that already some 2/3 of Americans and Europeans no longer experience real night, and nearly all of us live in areas considered polluted by light. To quantify that claim, there is a 9-level unit of measurement called the Bortle scale. There's actually a much more nuanced one in development that has 100 points, but this one has a 9-level unit of measurement for describing the relative differences between the brightnesses of the night sky in different areas due to light pollution. So when scientists tell us that 2/3 of Americans and Europeans no longer experience real night, what they mean is that if most of us look up at night, we see what is called a Class 9 sky, an inner city sky. Or some of us see a Class 7 sky, 2 points down on the scale, a suburban or an urban transition sky, or maybe about halfway down the scale at best, a Class 5 suburban sky. Because of the changes in our landscape, which has been increasingly electronically lit since the late 19th century, most Americans and Europeans, especially the youngest among us, have rarely or never experienced a night sky dark enough to register as a 3, a rural sky where only some indication of light pollution is evident on the horizon, or 2, a truly dark sight. As for Bortle's Class 1, which he describes as a sky so dark that the Milky Way casts obvious and diffuse shadows on the ground, many question if such darkness still exists in the lower 48 states. A level of darkness that for most of human history was common, but for the modern Western world has become unreal. Consider that from the observatory deck of the Empire State Building, we now see 1% of the stars that those in the 1700s era Manhattan would have seen. 1%. As our UU forebear Henry David Thoreau wrote in his journal in 1856, "Is it not a maimed and imperfect nature that I am conversant with? Primitive nature is most interesting to me. I take infinite pains to know all of the phenomena of spring, for instance, thinking that I have here the entire poem. And then to my chagrin, I learn that it is but an imperfect copy that I possess and have read, that my ancestors have torn out the first leaves and the grandest passages and have mutilated it in many places. I should not like to think that some demigod has come before me and picked out some of the best of the stars. I wish to know an entire heaven and an entire earth." The book that has raised my awareness, particularly around the masking of the stars at night, is Paul Bogard's The End of Night, Searching for Natural Darkness in an Age of Artificial Light. Sometimes I find a lot of wisdom from books or insights, but I don't necessarily recommend them to other people to read. But Bogard's book is actually quite accessible and actually really fascinating and goes to way more details than I can go into this morning. It's called The End of Night. And there are, though, and John named some of these as well, there are many wonderful advantages that come with electric light. The ability to work and play at night, as well as expanded safety and security, though we typically overdo it by far. But Bogard's book made me consider the consequences of light robbing us of the fullness of the night sky. He introduced me to terms such as light trespass, the way that unregulated, unshielded light creates unnecessary glares, endangering drivers, particularly elderly drivers, are inhibited in driving well because of the glare of unshielded street lights, as well as endangering pedestrians. They result in wasting energy in an age of climate change by not focusing the light where it's really needed and intended, and by shining the light into the sky instead of down, which is, again, where it's needed, thereby further dimming the views of stars. Parking lots are the worst offenders, as are gas stations, which are sort of competing to be ever and ever brighter against one another. And as much as I love downtown Frederick, when I walk around at night, my attention is rarely drawn to the night sky, except maybe by the moon. If I do look up, there are very few stars visible, even on a clear night like last night, maybe a dozen at most. There is a tipping point that people researching dark skies have noticed as they've introduced people to dark skies. to really, what does it take to have a breathtakingly beautiful night sky? One estimate is that an observer needs to see about 450 stars in the night sky to get that feeling of infinitude and of being swept away. And asking for 450 stars is not unreasonable in human history. Under a clear sky, free of light pollution, you should be seeing every night 2,700 stars. That's what our ancestors saw when they looked up. 2,700 stars. When the North American power grid faltered in August of 2004, some of you may remember that in the Northeast, over 10 million people took to the streets, not to loot or to protest, but to gaze astonished at the night sky. Because remember, the Northeast for years, for decades, has been that part of the country that was the first in that band of streaming light. For a few summer evenings, a postmodern population knew real quiet and true darkness. Reporters in Canada and the United States, seeking tales of horror and hardship, heard again and again about the glories of the firmament from those who had never seen it before. There's a technical term for this effect, when the horizon disappears and you feel like you're falling into the stars. It's called celestial vaulting. The last time I remember really viscerally experiencing celestial vaulting was about a decade ago. I was on a 5-day backpacking trip to the Bridger Wilderness in Wyoming, and we had hiked 2 days in, and then we had camped at the top of the mountain, because it turned out that the other side of the mountain was the north face, and it was covered by snow, and we had to turn around, and we should have talked to the ranger first, but that's a different sermon and life lesson. But on the top of that mountain where we camped at night, I got up in the middle of the night and just happened to look up, and I almost fell over. There were so many stars. Just a stunning resplendence. Ralph Waldo Emerson, another of our UU forebears, wrote in his 1836 essay, Nature, that if the stars, so if we had never seen the stars, and if the stars should suddenly appear one night in a thousand years, how would men believe and adore? What if stars only appeared once every 1,000 years? But every night the stars come out, and these envoys of beauty, and they light the universe with their admonishing smile. But tragically, from most of our perspectives, the stars don't actually come out as far as we can tell. And far too many of us have forgotten that most nights we should be seeing not dozens of stars, but thousands. There are still a few places in or near the U.S. where you can experience a dark night sky near the lower end of the Bortle scale. Black Rock Desert in Nevada, that's where the annual Burning Man Festival is held. You may or may not want to go during the Burning Man Festival. You can go other times of year. Mont Megantic National Park in southern Quebec, which has been designated a dark sky reserve by the International Dark Sky Association. Death Valley National Park, which is partially in both California and Nevada. Natural Bridges National Monument, Capitol Reef National Park, Bryce Canyon National Park, all in southern Utah. Cherry Springs State Park in Pennsylvania, a little more than 4 hours from here, is one of the best places in the eastern U.S. for stargazing. Some of you may want to add that to your summer or spring break list. And increasingly, you're seeing the national parks have dark sky programs where they facilitate you going out at night and really appreciating the night sky. Other dark sky national parks include Big Bend, Bryce Canyon, Natural Bridges, the Grand Canyon, Chaco Cultural Historical Park. Significantly, though this is pretty recently, like in the last decade and a half, the National Park Service now includes darkness as one of the resources it is sworn to protect. We too can accept that challenge to reclaim and protect our local view of the stars. A famous negative example is Las Vegas, which has twice the amount of light pollution one would expect from its population. In contrast, through dark sky ordinances, laws regulating the use of artificial light, Flagstaff, Arizona has achieved 25% lower light pollution than should be the case on average from its population size, and has been recognized as the world's first dark sky community. Hopefully there will be many others. The International Dark Sky Association's Dark Sky Community, Dark Sky Reserve, Dark Sky Park program requires that a community inventory its existing artificial lights outside, change those lights that are causing excessive glare and sky glow, and promise that any new lights will conform to an anti-light pollution regulation. For a quick gauge of sky quality next time you're outside at night, look up and, as John said, locate the Big Dipper. If you can see all 4 stars in its cup, you have basically good dark skies, a good starting point. But if you can only see the 2 stars at the front of the cup, your skies are fair to poor. In most American and European cities, you can't see the Little Dipper at all. If we were to get serious about dark sky ordinances, then in cities you might see a shift from 1 or 2 dozen stars to 3 or 4 dozen stars. A more significant change, though, is that if cities got serious, the suburbs, anywhere about 30 miles away from a major city, you would once again have quite high-quality skies. An additional motivation for cities, though, that may be saying, well, we only get 4 dozen stars, why should we bother? Well, part of it would be so your citizenry can drive just a mere 30 miles, not hours and hours and hours, to see a quality night sky. But additionally, dark sky ordinances lead to major savings in energy, which climate change activists could also get behind. It's estimated that the European Union spends some 1.7 billion euros on wasted outdoor lights that are inefficient. In the United States, the figure is similar, around $2.2 billion a year that could be saved with high-quality, well-directed and shielded lighting. Closest to home, I would love to see the downtown Frederick Historical Society, which has perhaps overly fetishized in some cases the architecture of Frederick at its founding. I would love to see them become more interested in preserving the view of the night sky that was present when Frederick was founded. You can reflect on what progress toward reclaiming starry skies might look like in your community as well. For steps on creating change, visit the website of the International Dark Sky Association. So you can just Google the International Dark Sky Association or go to darksky.org. If I had more time, I would summarize the highlights of what I've said in previous sermons from around this time of year on a winter solstice spirituality and a spirituality of winter. But suffice it to say that the world we have been creating for ourselves since the late 19th century, that is increasingly lit by electric lights and bright screens, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it distances us from the daily and seasonal rhythms of nature. An overabundance of light inhibits us from fully entering into those seasons of our lives in which we are called to practice more of what can be called a winter spirituality, of inwardness, of simplicity, of subtraction, of darkness, of silence, of letting go. May we increasingly relearn and reclaim the beauty and the wonder of the night sky that our ancestors knew. In that spirit, I will end for now with Wendell Berry's poem, To Know the Dark. He writes, "To go into the dark with a light is to know the light. To go into the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go without sight, and find the dark too blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings." As we continue to reflect on how we might be called to practice a winter solstice spirituality, a spirituality of darkness, of simplicity, and letting go, I invite you to rise and body your spirit, turn to hymn 55, Dark Winter.